Hello and welcome to Evrelia.com. This is a video guide to teach you everything you need to know about playing an Affliction Warlock in Mists-of-Pandaria patch 5.3. This guide will be very in-depth to teach you as much about the class as possible, but you can use the menu along the top of the screen to skip to the section of the guide that you want to see. Let's talk about your stat priorities as Affliction. For Affliction, your stat priorities will vary depending on a few factors. Haste and Mastery can change in value depending on how much you have of each and whether you have the new legendary Meta Gem or the new PPM trinkets from Throne of Thunder. No matter what, Intellect is always going to be your main stat. After that, you should always be close to the hit cap as possible, but try not to be over it because that's just wasting stats. Okay, so for single target, Haste is your best stat in almost all situations, even at extremely high amounts. Haste breakpoints are not relevant at all for single target, so don't worry about them and just stack as much haste as possible and go for Mastery as your second priority. For multi-target, things are a little more complicated. At certain levels of haste, your dots gain extra targets in the same space of time, giving you a small damage boost. These levels are only relevant for multi-dotting situations due to Pandemic. Mastery scales slightly better with your dot damage once you get enough haste as well, but given how good haste is for single target, and the fact that it gives you higher uptime on your trinkets and your meta gem, and the fact that it allows you to reach haste thresholds, you need to get some amounts of haste first. With very low gear levels, try to get at least 6637 and then go for Mastery after that. Once you can reach it, go for 9778 haste and then for Mastery. And when you're in mostly Throne of Thunder heroic gear, grab the 13737 breakpoint, which gives you extra ticks of agony and corruption. You can always use Simcraft to get a more accurate idea of how much of each stats you should get. You can watch our Simcraft tutorial to learn how to do this. When you're gemming for Affliction, you want to focus on getting your best stats while still going for socket bonuses. Gems have twice as much secondary stats on as primary stats, which usually makes them better. With this in mind, these are your gem choices. Red, 80 intellect and 160 haste. Yellow, 320 haste. Blue, 160 hit and 160 haste. These combinations give you the highest amount of your best stats without causing you to lose socket bonuses. These are the best enchants for Affliction. It's worth noting that if you're a tailor, you would replace the cloak enchant with lightweave embroidery. You can only use the ring enchants if you're an enchanter. Currently, the best professions for raiding are engineering and tailoring. There are no glyphs for Affliction that directly increase DPS, however there are several you can choose from that will give you additional survivability or utility. Glyph of Unstable Affliction makes Unstable Affliction's cast time shorter, but it does not reduce the global cooldown, so you do not gain any DPS from it. There may be some situations where being able to cast it faster may be beneficial to you, however. Glyph of Healthstone doubles the effectiveness of your Healthstone, but restores the health over time. This is a great defensive cooldown for fights with a constant and steady damage, but less effective for spiky damage. Glyph of Siphon Life gives you a great flow of passive healing over time. Glyph of Soulstone causes your Soulstone to resurrect the target with full health. And Glyph of Curse of Exhaustion gives you an extremely powerful slow on a 10-second cooldown. This is great for fights with slowable targets such as Council of Elders and Tortoise. You can use any of these glyphs and it's very recommended that you change them from encounter to encounter based upon the needs of each fight. The Observer provides the highest DPS of your pets. All of your pets are very close on DPS, so you can switch between them if needed. For example, you can use the Imp on fights with heavy target swapping since he has a much longer range and therefore ability to switch targets quickly. Talents in Mists-of-Pandaria are mostly situational choices. Here's a good default set of talents. The first tier focuses on healing. Soul Leech provides a constant absorption shield which can stack very highly and is great for reducing damage of frequent attacks such as Thunderstruck or Interrupting Jolt. Dark Regeneration increases all healing you take for 12 seconds and also restores 30% of your health in this time. This is very powerful when paired with Healthstone. In Tier 2 you can choose between crowd control abilities. Shadow Fury is your main stun ability and is useful for any fights with stunnable adds such as Lei Shen, Tortoise or Council. On any other fights you'll want to take Mortal Coil for the healing it provides. In Tier 3 you can choose between defensive cooldowns. Soul Link effectively grants you 30% increased health and is great for fights with frequent damage spikes that come too often for your longer cooldowns. Sacrificial Pact is a 1-minute cooldown ability that grants you a shield equal to your pet's health or your health if you have no pet out. This is good for high damage abilities that come slightly more spread out such as Jeekan's Quills. Finally, you have Dark Bargain. This has a very long cooldown, but has the highest life-saving potential and can mitigate attacks such as Lei Shen's static shock. I tend to use Soul Link on most encounters. Tier 4 features utility talents. Unbound Will is only useful on fights with dispellable magic effects such as Jinrock and Council. For all other fights, you'd want to take Burning Rush for the increased mobility. Tier 5 talents feature direct damage increasing talents. For Affliction, you want to use Grimoire of Supremacy in almost all situations. Although you may hear that Grimoire of Sacrifice is higher damage, this is only correct for fights where you have a high percentage of Malefic Grasp uptime, such as fights without any target switching. The only fights that fit this criteria is Jinrock. For every other fight you'll get better results with Grimoire of Supremacy. Tier 6 talents provide situational DPS increases. You'll find that you'll want to use Kil'jaeden's Cunning in almost all situations within Throne of Thunder as Affliction, since all of the fights have a high degree of movement. This talent allows you to cast whilst moving, although you will run slower whilst it happens. Manaros Fury can be useful on fights with a high AoE when the targets are too spread out, but there aren't really any fights in Throne of Thunder where Affliction needs this. For your trinkets, you can use any of the Throne of Thunder trinkets and you won't notice massive differences. These are the best 3 trinkets in the game currently. Now technically the best in slot combination is Lei Shen's and Wuxia according to Simcraft. You can get extremely good RNG if you get a Lei Shen trinket proc at the same time that your Wuxia is on high stacks, but these situations will be rare and your burst won't be as high at the start because Lei Shen's will fall off before Wuxia can stack high. If you want more consistency, then go for Breath of the Hydra with either of the other 2 trinkets. Affliction is all about dealing damage over time. You have 3 main dots that provide the bulk of your damage. Agony is your most effective dot. Agony starts at 1 stack when you apply it and slowly increases to 10 stacks over time. The more stacks it has, the more damage it does. If you refresh it when it has 10 stacks, it will stay at 10 stacks. If you let it fall off, it will start at 1 again. Its base duration is 24 seconds. Corruption is your weakest dot, but also your most important. Every time it does damage, you have a chance to generate a soul shard. Its base duration is 18 seconds. Unstable Affliction is your third dot. This does moderate damage and has a cast time. Its base duration is 14 seconds. Your filler spell is Malefic Grasp. This is a channeled spell that deals damage each time it ticks, and whenever it deals damage it also causes any dots on the target to instantly deal bonus damage to the target. You have another filler spell which is Drained Soul. This works in the same way as Malefic Grasp but only on targets that are below 20% health. It should only be used on targets that are below 20% health. You have 2 special abilities. The first is Haunt. This uses one of your 4 soul shards to put a debuff on the target, increasing all damage you do to that target by 30% for 8 seconds. The other is Soulburn. This consumes one of your soul shards to grant extra effects to some of your spells. The most important of these spells is Soul Swap. Soul Swap normally allows you to pull your dots off of one target and transfer them to another. When you use this with Soulburn, this instantly applies all of your dots to a target. For AoE you have Seed of Corruption. This places a damage over time effect on a target that explodes once the target takes enough damage. The explosion deals damage to nearby enemies. If you use Soulburn with Seed of Corruption, the explosion will apply corruption to every target it hits. Finally, you have Dark Soul. This is a cooldown ability that increases your spell haste by 30% for 20 seconds. Before we talk about how to play, there are a few basic mechanics that you need to understand in order to do maximum DPS. Firstly is how Pandemic works. At level 90, if you recast a dot on a target that already has that dot, the duration of the existing dot is added to the new one up to a maximum of a 50% increase. So for example, if you have a corruption on a target that has 6 seconds left, then casting corruption on it again will increase the duration of your corruption to 24 seconds. The maximum duration you can increase it to is 27 seconds, which is a 50% increase on its base duration of 18 seconds. This means that you should usually only recast dots when they have less than 50% of their base duration remaining. For Corruption, this is 9 seconds, for Agony this is 12 seconds, and for Unstable Affliction this is 7 seconds. This can vary slightly with your haste. The other mechanic that you need to understand is how dot snapshotting works. Whenever you cast a dot, it takes a snapshot of your stats at the time and remembers them for its entire duration. This means that when you gain temporary buffs or cooldowns, such as Trinkets or Dark Soul, your dots will not benefit unless you cast them again. This is very important to understand for maximizing your DPS because you have to react to such effects and recast your dots to update them. Let's talk about your opening rotation. At the start of the fight, you should use a potion of the Jade Serpent just before you enter combat and cast a Haunt. timed to land as soon as the boss is pulled. Next, use Dark Soul Misery and Soulburn Soul Swap to instantly apply all of your dots to the enemy. Now you should start channeling Malefic Grasp until you get some intellect procs. You can use the add-on Power Auras or Weak Auras to track these procs, as well as the Strength Tracker AF Dots, which I explain in my add-ons guide. Once you have most or all of your procs up, cast Soulburn Soul Swap again to update your dots with these effects, making them stronger. Make sure to keep the Haunt debuff on your target and continue channeling Malefic Grasp. Now for the remainder of the fight, you simply keep your dots up on the target and channel Malefic Grasp. You should try to react to intellect procs as much as possible and refresh your dots early in their pandemic window. The best time to use Haunt is when your dots are buffed with effects such as Dark Soul or significant procs such as Trinkets. This is because you have a limited number of Haunts per fight anyway, so it's best to amplify stronger dots instead of weaker ones. Don't ever use Haunts when your dots have no buffs, unless you already have 4 soul shards. Usually when you want to recast your dots, you should do so by manually recasting them. However, you can use Soulburn Soul Swap to recast them if you're doing so to update them with Trinket procs or Dark Soul and only have a short window to do this. If I get multiple Trinket procs at once, for example, I will immediately Soulburn Soul Swap and Haunt so that I can begin channeling Malefic Grasp on these targets as fast as possible. Again, I highly recommend Power Auras and AF Dots to keep track of your dots. When it comes to multiple targets, the same principles apply. You should try to keep all of your dots up on as many targets as possible. Use your shards on Soulburn Soul Swaps as needed to apply and maintain dots on multiple targets, and cast them manually when you can't. Although on fights like Primordius and Horadon, you should drain the soul adds as they die in order to get shards back, allowing you to do nothing but chain cast Soulburn Soul Swaps instead of manually casting your dots. After you've done that, continue your single target rotation on one target. Once you reach 7 or more targets, you should use Soulburn Seed of Corruption to maintain corruption on all targets, and use your Soul Shard procs to use as many Soulburn Soul Swaps as possible, and continually cast Seed of Corruption in that interim. You should try to cast Seed of Corruption onto targets that already have your dots ticking on them, so that it detonates instantly. Alternate between 2 targets if needed to allow it to detonate before your next Seed of Corruption lands. For multi-target dotting, Tidy Plate is an essential add-on since it displays your dots directly above the afflicted target.